Cooperative games are a rare breed nowadays, so much so that multiple modding teams have taken it upon themselves to make games otherwise unplayable in co-op work, whether it be online or on the couch. So for a team like Hazelight Studios, to make multiple games in which you have to have 2 players, and both players will always be on the screen, is unique and interesting to say the least. Their first game, A Way Out, was a prison break narrative in which players had to perform tasks asynchronously but collaboratively. It used the format in some interesting ways, but largely felt like a proof of concept for a game that hadn't been made yet. I believe that It Takes Two is that very game, and it takes the foundation set by A Way Out and builds something magnificent upon it. One very unique thing, even separating it from A Way Out, is that the 2 player characters, Cody and May, each get unique functions in the numerous gameplay sections. For example, in one section, Cody gets a sap gun that shoots this sticky substance onto things, and May gets a match gun that blows up that sap, so the 2 are asynchronous but must work together. When I chose to do this video, I was debating on whether I wanted to just switch to playing May so I could get some hands-on experience with her gameplay styles, but I chose not to, as that felt not in the spirit of the game. No, what felt more in the spirit of the game
was to get some assistance on this one.
My wife's going to provide her opinions throughout this one, which will no doubt alone make this the best video I've ever made, so let's go.
At its core, It Takes Two is a 3D platformer, so the movement of your characters is the most important element of the gameplay. May and Cody can both jump and double jump while in the air after any action that lets them leave the ground. They can jump off of walls. Wall jumping between 2 walls that are close to each other will allow them to scale pretty large heights. They can also cling to walls by jumping into them, though they will slide down slowly. They can clamber up walls by clinging to them and then jumping up, though they can only do this once in succession. On the ground, they can perform a dash and can even perform a second, faster dash if the dash button is hit with the right timing after the first dash, though this is never used to build challenges. They can also dash in the air. Early on in the game, they get a grappling hook of sorts that lets them swing on certain points throughout the levels. All of this feels pretty good. It's not quite to the standard of, say, Super Mario Odyssey, but for a game that's going to throw numerous gameplay elements at you per level, its basic platforming is surprisingly tight.
The type of platforming gauntlets this game will give you are of the large but moving variety. Very little of it is based on precision, more so it's based on timing. This is one of the many ways the game smooths out the difficulty of the gameplay for those who are less technically capable. Furthermore, as we'll see later, much of the actual timing of the challenges is determined by one of the players, so it's another element of cooperation that can make the experience smoother or more difficult. Dying, however, is rarely more than a slap on the wrist, if that. You'll appear instantly at the beginning of the challenge, often on the platform you just jumped from, though this is not always the case. Even when it's not, though, the checkpoint system is extremely forgiving and encourages confidence even in less skilled players. The death system also encourages this confidence. If one player dies during certain segments such as bosses or chase sequences, a heart will appear on their side of the screen. Mashing the Y button will refill the heart more quickly, and once it's full, that player is respawned. During this time, the other player must stay alive, because if they both die at the same time, they are reset to a checkpoint. This system allows for the players to carry each other in essence. As long as they don't die at the same time, they can have infinite sustain and slowly work their way through some of the more difficult sections of the game.
Oh no! Dang it!
We freaking died!
Our first real death. Oh wow, that was a good checkpoint. The basic gameplay overview shows that Hazelight put a lot of thought behind making this a good experience for couples of any skill level. Everything said so far feeds into the rest of the game as the building blocks for a good experience. All that remains is to explore all the myriad additions to the gameplay, gimmicks that give each level a unique identity. Almost every level is going to give Cody and May their own gadgets, which must be used in tandem with each other in order to progress. Cody will never use May's gadgets, and May will never use Cody's. This is a clever design decision that plays into the themes of the story as well as encourages that collaboration Dr. Hakim is begging for. It also can get players out of their comfort zone by telling them that they have no choice but to use certain mechanics. It's an interesting way for a game to flow, but the real discussion is in the gadgets themselves, so let's get into it.
We start out after a good chunk of time just getting used to platforming with the hammer and nail section. May gets the hammer, a simple weapon that can be used to break objects, push buttons, and swing on the nails Cody provides. This is prior to the aforementioned grappling hook, just by the way. It's punchy and straightforward. Cody gets the nails, which he can throw at wooden targets throughout the levels. He can also activate buttons and pin things to walls. He gets up to 3 nails by the end of the level, and using them is snappy. Throughout the level, Cody often takes a back seat to May as he controls many of the platforms May must jump and swing across. This is iterated upon pretty well as the levels progress, with the final level of the progression involving Cody needing to activate and deactivate platforms at certain times in order to get May through a fairly complicated set of platforms. The hammer, however, doesn't seem to have much progression, not evolving far beyond hit buttons when that's basically the only thing to do. While Cody's mechanic is iterated upon, he does often feel like an observer as May platforms around, which can be kind of boring. We will see that this is a bit of a pattern in this game, as the developers toyed with the best ways to create cooperative platforming and puzzling mechanics.
This level finishes out with our second boss fight, against a sentient toolbox, and it exhibits the basic building blocks that every boss follows. First, the offensive phase. In this one, Cody must pin the toolbox's arms in such a way that May can traverse over to the lock and try to bust it up. She will get returned back to the main platform 2 times before the lock breaks. In between offensive phases, you enter into what's best described as a dodging phase. The boss will send a volley of attacks at Cody and May, and you have to dodge for the duration. These are forced waiting periods, but they work because they are so well paced and entertaining. In many of these, the platform you are on will be slowly destroyed by drills and saws, while the rest of the attacks continue to come at the same pace as before. I love this style of defensive phase in a platforming boss because it continually ramps up the tension and excitement, and this game has some of the best ones I've seen. Later on, it's Cody's turn to throw nails at the can in the top of the toolbox in order to blow it up. May has to launch him in the air with her hammer on the spatulas. This is, frankly, just an excellent boss from top to bottom. It's hectic, entertaining, and not frustrating in the least. The next level gives Cody the Nectar Gun, or as I typically called it, the Sap. Sap can coat yellow surfaces and weigh down certain items like platforms. May gets the Match Gun. It shoots flaming darts that can activate switches, but mostly it is used to blow up the sap Cody leaves behind. Some puzzles require Cody to coat certain objects, and May to blow up that sap in a certain order in order to get the players across. They each have auto-aim, which is both a good thing and a bad thing, especially for Cody. The way it works for certain smaller targets, the sap wouldn't actually stick unless the reticle was locked on, even if the reticle was right over the target. Many of the puzzles see Cody controlling platforms for May in some way, which again becomes kind of boring throughout the level.
This is the first level with combat, and it's an interesting system. These hornets will come and attack you, and Cody must paint them with sap so May can hit them with a torch and take them out permanently. It's a dichotomous system. May is reactively responding to Cody's sap. This has the potential to be frustrating. If Cody's player is less experienced than May's, May could get very bored waiting for Cody to actually hit his targets. The auto-aim smooths this out some, but I could see it being pretty annoying. Later on, Cody and May will ride this barrel lid down a river of sorts, using Cody's sap gun as an engine to propel the lid down the river. May can shoot these exploding sap sacks in the river to protect them, but largely this part gets pretty boring for May, as there's really not much for her to do. Again, this could be different if Cody was less skilled, but since I've got this guy behind the wheel, I didn't feel the need to do a whole lot. The boss for this section is the Wasp Queen, and she's also a great boss. This time she's in an arena surrounded by a grinding rail, which will need to be traversed by both players in order to finish the boss. The Wasp Queen has 3 targets on her chassis: her thorax thing, her back, and her chest, and Cody and May must work together in order to take them out. Occasionally, the Wasp Queen will call swarms of wasps to protect her, which must be blown up. Careful use of the sap and matches is key here, as running low on either is likely to prolong the fight for a while. As you're doing this, the wasp swarms are throwing attacks at you pretty consistently, meaning Cody isn't bored even as he's waiting for May to shoot the sap he's placed. At certain HP intervals, the Wasp Queen will also send the players into defensive dodgy phases. These get surprisingly complicated, and I love how unafraid the devs were of testing the players' abilities.
After the fight, Cody and May will ride this airplane made of Cody's underwear, making it an underwear plane. Thank you, I'll be here all week. This gives way to a Street Fighter style fighting scene on top of the plane. It also ends with the best long setup gag in gaming history.
That is the last time I'm flying by the seat of your pants.
Oh, haha, you're a real comedian, you know that?
Next up, Cody and May go to space. I promise all of this makes more sense when you know the story. Cody gets the ability to shrink or expand into 3 different sizes, which he can then use to manipulate his surroundings with. May gets a pair of magnet boots that let her walk on certain pathways, Ratchet & Clank style. Hearing that, you'd almost think this would be the weakest set of puzzles we've seen yet, but that's not the case, as this actually gives way to some more pure and classic platforming and puzzle design. A standout is this side-scrolling level with some great puzzles and spectacle. It's just fun. These levels also do some interesting things with the rope swinging mechanic. Each floor has 3 offshoots where the actual levels are, and at the end of them it automatically returns you to the beginning so you don't have to backtrack. It's a small detail, but such a nice quality of life thing. The end of this level sees us fighting who flies around in a ship shooting all kinds of lasers and rockets down at the players. At first they have to work together to bait Moon Baboon to shoot his lasers into these 3 fuses, which require the players to use their abilities. Then you commandeer the rockets he shoots and pilot them back into the ship. At the end of that, Cody enters the ship and has to do a platforming gauntlet, while May avoids an onslaught of attacks. It's actually kind of crazy how hectic her side of this section becomes while she waits for Cody to finish the job. I love the details while you're running through the ship. We'll talk about presentation later, but the fact that you see Moon Baboon's adorable little foot driving the ship is just great. The next level has a lot of little mechanics dedicated to it, as well as some clever puzzles. The fidget spinners last approximately all of 5 minutes, but they're fun to use. Not long after, Cody and May are sucked into the vomit-inducing kaleidoscope, which is mercifully over quickly. Cody and May then go to this castle town and pilot the ship around for a while. It's fine, but there's not much to say about it, honestly. The circus is up next, and there's a lot of creative puzzles here too.
Yeah, I should probably tell you.
Then you get to the foot of the castle itself, which is the first big open area full of stuff to interact with. There's so much cute stuff to do around here, and it has one of the 25 challenges scattered across the game. These are like mini games that pit the 2 players against each other competitively. This one in particular is called Bird Star, and it's basically Dance Dance Revolution.
Wow, I sucked that up. Yes, you are a drummer.
I am a drummer.
And I have a music degree.
These were also in Hazelight's last outing, A Way Out, but here they're a bit more thematically appropriate, not to mention creative and fun. They give the 2 players an opportunity to be competitive, and many of them are designed in such a way that raw skill at video games won't necessarily buy you success, so both players have a chance of winning.
Once you decide to move on, you'll be captured by the castle guard and end up finding some magical clothing, letting Cody cast long-range ice spells and May swing a flaming sword around. This feels sort of Diablo-esque. Each player has 3 moves they can perform: a basic attack, a dodge, a special attack, and a limit break of sorts. There's a lot of combat in this area, but that doesn't mean it's completely devoid of puzzles. Most of the puzzles are based on May and Cody's unique dodge abilities. Cody can dodge through semi-permeable barriers such as gel cell walls, but can't go very far. May can dodge across large distances and gaps. This is a basis for puzzles, both in combat and out of combat. Certain enemies can only be taken out by Cody or May depending on where they are. Am I being too bold when I say that Blizzard should consider taking some cues from this game for their next Diablo? Maybe, but this is a great use of the mechanics either way. This level ends with a boss fight against a sentient set of chess pieces. Clever, because most of the attacks are based on the movement patterns of the pieces themselves. Not much else to say here though, it's a button mashing fest. After traumatizing everyone, Hakeem takes a more hands-on approach to his therapy, and so we are thrust into more fantastical levels. First, a level based on time. Cody gets a timepiece that he can use to control the flow of time for certain objects. May gets to clone herself and warp to her clone in an instant. This is going to sound familiar, but Cody largely has to control platforms for May to jump around on. This works this time though because there's such a wide spectrum of states each platform can be in, and all the way to one side of the scrub bar or the other is not always the solution. It's also used in much more interesting ways, such as the part at the end where you have to control a huge number of platforms in sequence, and knowing where to stop so May can move on is actually pretty difficult. This level has some very interesting puzzles and platforming design, some of which feels like it needed a good bit more exploration. It's a fairly long level, but feels so short in spite of that. This one doesn't end with the traditional boss, just a very intense set of platforming and dodging challenges. A nice change of pace, to be sure.
The next level takes us to a snowy mountain, and it's the first time where an entire level was built around both characters having basically the same mechanic, just with a slight tweak. Cody and May get one half of a magnet each, one blue and one red. May is sure to note that that's not how magnets work, but it is here. Each magnet is attracted to the opposite color and repelled by the same color, and this is how it builds its mechanics. There's a lot of interesting things this level does with this idea, and it goes on for pretty long too. It also has some of the most satisfying swimming controls I've experienced in a game for a while. Ice skating is no slouch either, it's got an impressive sense of speed tied to it. Roughly in the middle of the level, you'll find yourself in this great mountain town full of things to interact with. It's beautiful and entertaining as well. Later on, the magnets will be able to magnetize to each other, which is a short-lived section but has some solid puzzle design tied to it. Again, no traditional boss fight, but it does do a great job of exploring this magnet mechanic to an impressive extent. Next is the greenhouse, and Cody can use the leaf on his head to strike enemies and grab things, usually to open up flowers so May can water them with her water gun, opening up pathways. May can also water pots of soil that Cody can jump into in order to become some new kind of plant that gives him a new power, like becoming a turret or creating platforms for May to jump across. May also gets a sickle that she can use to attack enemies with, and Cody and May must once again work together to beat some of the tougher enemy types. There isn't a lot of puzzle design in this area, instead being more focused on platforming and combat. It does have the only stealth section in the game, which is an excellent example of forced stealth in a non-stealth game done well. Both characters contribute to a sound meter as they move, and jumping across platforms will cause it to spike temporarily. If both characters move too quickly at the same time, the sound meter will go up extremely fast, so it encourages communication and patience. In the second half of the section, Cody becomes a crawling circle of moss that May must use to quietly traverse the sea of noisy shells. There's not a lot of cooperative stealth games out there, but this makes me salivate at the possibilities that a full-fat co-op stealth game could have if the devs got weird with it. It's a great little part of the game. The boss of this area has some of the best dodging phases of the game, just look at how hectic this stuff is.
The final level sees us collecting music equipment for a concert. May can sing to manipulate objects and can, bark to manipulate other kinds of objects. Cody gets a symbol that he can throw to destroy things and uses a shield to block lasers or other deadly attacks. This level has a lot of spectacle and fun events, but once again, the puzzle design seems to take a back seat. There's not many interesting puzzles throughout, and it ends with a speedy dash through a tunnel. In fact, there's a lot of sections like that in this one, where you're dodging things and moving forward at a great speed. Most of the slower sections just boil down to see a new thing, do the thing, move on. Like this part where May controls the platform so Cody can get to the other side of this laser-filled gap. This isn't really a puzzle because the solution is telegraphed so readily. You just have to do it. No boss at the end of this one either. It's an odd way to end the game from a gameplay standpoint, that's for sure.
The game does, largely, a great job of taking its mechanics and building some interesting challenges and puzzles throughout. Each level iterates on its gimmicks to some degree, and some take it to a pretty good extent. Probably the most successful portions of this game come in the form of the bosses. Each and every one has unique and clever design and never gets boring or tedious. They last exactly as long as they feel they need to and have a ton of varied goals throughout. They're honestly some of the best bosses in any 3D platformer I've come across. It shouldn't be taken lightly just how much effort was put into making sure the two players stayed relevant throughout, and this is definitely an area of great improvement over A Way Out. In that game, for the most part, every section could be completed by either character doing either role, unless you were arbitrarily forced into doing one or the other. Obviously, It Takes Two takes a more deliberate approach to its collaborative mechanics, and it comes out much stronger for it, as the two players have to rely on each other constantly to perform actions that they are themselves incapable of. It was important that the game got this right, because this feeds so well into the themes of the game, which we'll go over in more detail in a while. It's impressive that they made these mechanics work for both puzzles and combat, and both have this collaborative element. The only unfortunate thing about this element of the design is that it feels a little imbalanced. More often than not, Cody will be standing around and controlling platforms for May to jump over. May does this sometimes too, but Cody tends to get stuck with this role more often.
Furthermore, as the game progresses, it seems like the developers lost creative steam, especially in those last two levels. The spectacle on display remains high, but the puzzle design becomes rarer if present at all, and the developers rely more on short-term gimmicks like rideable mounts and chase sequences to pad out the runtime of each level. It's still good, mind you, as it should be with a foundation as strong as this game has. It could have been completely devoid of puzzles and still been entertaining. It's just the contrast from the excellent puzzle design of the clock and snow levels against two levels with barely any puzzles at all that strikes me as a little rushed. On the other hand, some of the gimmicks on display here are so well thought out that they could probably suffice for an entire game on their own, like the clock mechanics. To that extent, the grand majority of the game is extremely solid from a game design standpoint. Not only is a game designed for 2 people, but even just in general. It's got some great decisions that other games could take cues from, like the forgiving death and checkpoint system. Notice that the game can still be difficult even when taking its potentially unskilled player base into account, because its death and checkpoint systems are so forgiving. This doesn't make the game too easy, it makes the game devoid of frustration, almost entirely, and that's an excellent feat. Even with its flaws, it's a resounding achievement in the game design department.
Story, on the other hand, may not be so resounding. If you want to know our general opinion on it, it's not bad by any means. It even has some solidly humorous and touching moments. But some narrative decisions get in the way of it being a fully, undisclaimedly enjoyable story, but alas, disclaim I must. Let's just lay out the groundwork of the story before we really dig in.
The game opens with a scene establishing that Cody and May are planning on getting a divorce. Rose overhears from the windows of her room. While you might think Rose would swelter with this information for a while before revealing that she knows this to her parents before they were ready for her to, they actually just tell her straight up over dinner during the very next scene. Rose runs off to the tool shed and grabs the Book of Love by Dr. Hakim and wishes her parents could be friends again before crying on these little dolls she made that look awfully similar to her parents. This causes Cody and May to fall asleep, waking up moments later as these dolls. Dr. Hakim appears soon after, telling the couple that he will help fix their relationship.
Thank you for that.
The next few levels are largely instigated by Dr. Hakim in order to force them to work together on their collaboration. For example, Hakim tells this vacuum the truth about why he hasn't been fixed yet, causing the vacuum to become very upset with both of them. Through this, we see Cody and May have a penchant to blame each other when things aren't done properly or remain unfinished.
This would never have happened if you hadn't broken it.
Oh, yeah? Well, this would never have happened if you had fixed it like you promised.
Well, I didn't know we'd end up in a place where all vacuum cleaners alive.
Well, now we are. Huh?
Later, Hakim closes the door on them so they have to find an alternative route to the house, saying,
Stuckness is a mental construct. If you stare at the closed door, you will miss the one that's open.
Okay, FYI, there is only one door in this shed.
And one window.
Good thinking, May! Whoa! Let's go to the window. Whoa!
Book is out of his mind, okay?
They look through these binoculars and see themselves unconscious in the house. They posit on why this happened, and Cody surmises that perhaps her crying casts a spell on them, and they need to make her cry again in order for the spell to be reversed. Periodically, Rose will go to see either Cody or May, trying to cheer them up or convince them not to separate. It's pretty heart-wrenching, honestly.
The tree level mostly comes and goes without much importance, but there are a number of moments where we get to see their characters expounded upon. The significance of the mechanics for their characters is not lost on me either. Cody has a gun that shoots sap, a sticky, sweet substance that is incapable of doing much of anything on its own. Cody himself is overly sentimental and emotional and rarely puts his foot down when it's important. May's gun, however, shoots flaming matches that start fires and explosions. She is snappy, hot-tempered, and impatient with Cody more often than not. Next, the couple gets abducted into space by the self-proclaimed best friend to Rose, who overheard that they are trying to make Rose cry. There's a pretty sad scene when they finally beat him at the end of the level.
But you have to help us get back to her.
Okay. But you have to promise you won't make her cry.
Yeah, we promise.
Okay. Tell Rose that whatever happens, I'll always be her best friend!
Cody and May make their way to the castle of Queen Cutie, all the while being heckled by Hakim periodically. When they reach the queen, they do what any sane parents would do in this situation. They brutally murder her so that Rose will cry on them and release them from the spell. This scene is as horrific as this game could possibly get. It revels in the joke so thoroughly, but it's certainly not a joke you'll be wanting to laugh at unless you're psychotic. Rose does indeed cry, but this doesn't fix their problem, unfortunately, even after rubbing themselves with her tears like it's a hot shower. They find a note that Rose wrote, but Hakim destroys it before they can read it. Then he transports them onto a therapy couch where he gives them specific lessons on their relationship, in exchange for a fourth of the letter for each lesson.
First up is time, and this is where I feel we get the most development on the actual problems their relationship faces.
It's true. You're never at home.
Cody, do you really think I'm choosing to be away from home?
I don't know. That's just what it's been like for a long time.
Well, it's not my choice.
What do you mean?
If I lost my job, we'd lose everything.
Okay. But when you're never around, we lose us.
When they reach the end of the level, they are said to be more in sync, and Rose notices the old broken clock has started working again, and so she puts it back on the wall. Next, Hakeem aims to increase the couple's attraction to each other, and so they are transported into the snow globe they bought on their first ski trip. They are tasked with ringing bells to break the ice, which is supposed to liven up the town being a picture of their relationship.
Use your magnet powers, and the attraction will warm you up, baby. Yeah, you feel that? Mwah, 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 mwah. You just gotta feel that warmth. Mwah, kisses. You like?
Then they must turn on a candy-producing facility in order to let the sweetness flow. Finally, they must climb on top of the mountain, which is where Cody proposed. There's some nice moments in here, such as the awkward elevator ride they share at the end of the level, and of course, the scene at the very top of the mountain.
Now I know why that book sent us here.
Yeah. This is where I proposed. I was so nervous.
I know. And that's what made it special.
Really?
You know, how you forgot your whole speech.
It was the worst proposal in the history of proposals.
No, Cody. I didn't care about the words. It was the way you handled it, without trying to hide how scared you were. It was brave.
The next two levels are actually the same lesson but focused on one person each. They must rekindle their passion. For Cody, he used to love to garden, and in fact, it's a large reason why they moved into this house in the first place. But he stopped because, as he says, she wasn't supporting me. As the first flower he planted, Joy, tells him, "It's your dream to pursue or give up. It's not her fault." Then, May used to love to sing, but she's afraid to now. Cody is blatantly supportive of her doing so and helps her gather up all the tech she would need to sing in front of a crowd, including the crowd itself. As May gets ready to go out and perform, she and Hakeem share probably the best scene in the game.
It doesn't have to be perfect, you know.
Oh, yes, it does. If it's not perfect, I'll let them down.
No, just sing from your heart. You weren't born to be perfect. You were born to be you.
Then she says, for a while before flying toward Cody, they share an embrace and the spell is broken. The couple finally reads the note Rose left, learning that she blames herself at the surprise of basically no one in the audience. Rose ran away and the couple gives chase. They find her getting ready to board a bus and assure her that none of this was her fault and that they will always be there for her, and then they walk away into the proverbial sunset.
So before we start digging into this game's story, I think it's important that you understand our relationship and where we're coming from. Marriage is a complicated thing. There are as many opinions about what a marriage should look like as there are married people on the planet right now. For us, we are Christians, and so our primary goal is to put God and His will above each other, and each other above ourselves. We believe that as long as we seek His will, He will provide us with whatever we need to have a successful relationship. Assuredly, not everyone listening to this video is going to agree with this, but I'm of the opinion that any marriage not built on this principle is built on a fine line. While it may sound insane to some, what it's led to is 6 years of a happy marriage with no fighting, very few arguments, and a satisfying living situation. We have had disagreements, but we've always been respectful of each other's feelings, and they've never gotten heated. We find that as long as our household is in proper alignment with what the Bible says, we work out, and that's been our observation of couples around us as well. Those built on the standards of Christian marriage typically stand the test of time and storm, whereas those built on any other foundation always seem teetering on the edge. Many people got married around the time we did or even before us back in college, but very few of them are still together today, but we're still kicking. Now, for those of you out there that inevitably decide that this automatically makes our opinions on the actual relationship counseling of this game moot or irrelevant, consider this. You just listened to us talk about game design for the better part of 30 minutes. We have 6 years of experience as a happily married couple, and the collective couple of hours experience in game design entirely consisting of that one time I decided I was going to learn Unity. So if you can listen to us and respect our opinion on the game design of this game, even more so should you be able to listen to us and respect our opinion on the story, because 10,000 hours makes you an expert, and we have somewhere in the ballpark of 52,596 hours of experience in a committed, successful relationship. With that said, here's our thoughts.
Nothing that Dr. Hakim says is bad by any means. He wants Cody and May to work on collaborating, a sort of ambiguation on the idea of being in alignment with each other. He wants them to respect each other's time as well as how they choose to spend it, but also recognize that they must devote some time to each other. He wants them to grow in their physical and emotional attraction to each other. Finally, he wants them to work on their passions. We'll grab onto that last point in a bit, but the first few all have one thing in common. These are not solutions, they are statements of fact. What I mean is, I think anyone with a brain in their skull would look at these criteria Hakim is gunning for and acknowledge that they are important for a healthy relationship to grow or even function at all. But the problem is that, at the point the game picks up the story, Cody and May are too far gone. It's not enough to acknowledge that they need more attraction to each other. We have to determine why it left them in the first place. We have to find the weed and pull it before it chokes out the whole garden. Many of the levels that focus on a specific point come and go seemingly without much of a point at all. Simply saying, you should respect each other's time, or you should be more attracted to each other, without doing anything to establish how this would or should happen.
As for passions, well, here's the thing. Following your passions has little to nothing to do with being in a healthy relationship. At least, it shouldn't. Case in point, I didn't start making YouTube videos until 3 years into our marriage. We were perfectly fine before, and our relationship wasn't strengthened in any significant way after. Now, there is a possibility that this would help strengthen your relationship if your fulfillment or identity is found in that passion. As for me and my wife, that is not the case. We find our fulfillment and identity not in passions nor each other, but in God. And so this is one of those lessons that I can recognize as perhaps being important for some couples, but ultimately feels like a band-aid on a larger problem of priority. Here's 2 possible solutions to this story issue. The first is that Dr. Hakim is actually, canonically, a terrible book and doesn't actually know what he's doing. He says at the beginning of the game that Rose
Purchase me. She was lucky. I was the last copy because I was selling the best.
way at the end of the game, we learn that Rose actually pulled him out of the trash.
Where did you find this?
I found it at school, in a trash can.
Well, I'm glad you did.
Sometimes you can find real treasures in the trash.
Could this be trying to hint that he's actually not a very good therapist at all? May even questions Rose's motivation of buying the book a little after they start their journey. Hakim is regularly frustrating, annoying, and seems to even stir up more trouble in their relationship at times. This doesn't feel like a stretch in the slightest to say that the devs intended this interpretation, but here's another that I think is completely viable.
The other possibility is that Hakim's goal wasn't to fix their marriage per se, but instead to simply put their divorce on hold long enough for them to come to their own, better conclusions about their relationship. By the end of the game, they still aren't confident enough in their love for each other to tell Rose straight that they won't divorce when she asks them.
Honey, listen, whatever happens, your mom and me, we will always be there for you.
And we'll always love you.
Always.
Okay.
This is by far the most realistic way for this game to end, and supports the idea that Hakim was actually successful. He wasn't interested in saving their relationship outright, but rather forcing them to build collaboration, and then giving them the tools they would need to see each other in a different light, and perhaps decide to stay together. Whether you accept either of these interpretations or not, the actual therapy for this couple is perhaps a bit misguided. Hakim spends significantly more time on their passions than on time for each other or attraction to each other. And regardless of whether you agree with me on the irrelevance of passions in a healthy relationship, you have to admit that those other things are at least more important. I actually fully believe that at least one of these 2 interpretations is true, in light of which the story works fairly well from the therapy aspect, as this is how a critical relationship situation like this should be handled.
As for the actual writing, the game does suffer, as I said previously, from becoming more flippant as it progresses. It starts out fairly strong, and there are some solid jokes in certain parts, It also peppers in more meaningful moments and character building for the couple. The part of the attraction level where their magnets become attracted to each other is exceptionally heavy-handed though, laying on the metaphor a bit too thick. While I do think it is largely effective, it has numerous moments where it feels like they're trying a bit too hard to be funny as well. I'm mostly okay with it though, it's not cringy and Hakeem is annoying in a more funny way than anything else. Then there's the pacing. For the most part, the pacing of the story is impressive. The gameplay and story feed into each other, one increasing the tension of the other, especially as the story ramps up to the mid-game climax. The short, quick-fire style of game design in the Castle Town, Circus, and Toy Box inspire the breakneck speed at which the story is barreling towards a tragedy of sorts. I have two problems with the pacing as a whole though. Firstly, that mid-game climax, when Cody and May murder Cutie, really is a climax in a traditional sense. It's the highest point of action and tension, and the whole game after that point, of which there is still a significant amount, is falling toward the resolution. This definitely makes the roughly second half of the game feel almost like an afterthought, even though it's got some of the most impressive and entertaining gameplay sections. Second, the two levels on Passion at the end of the game are lesser than the other two in the final forward level chunk, both from a gameplay and narrative standpoint. Had these things been swapped, as in the two Passion levels were moved to the beginning of this 4-level chunk, and the game ended on either time or attraction, it would be a much stronger package for the second half of the game.
It wouldn't be fair to this game if we didn't talk about the presentation. In terms of art direction, this game is a masterclass to be sure. Each level does something creative with its art direction. The early levels are, for the most part, grounded in a bit more realism, the tool shed exhibiting the most realistic areas, just blown up to grander proportions. One detail about this game is that the platforms are all framed in the context of the level. So in the tool shed, for example, you're jumping over saws, levels, like the tool, not the description of a chunk of gameplay, big pieces of wood, all stuff you'd expect to find in a location like this. This trend continues as we go further. The tree level is a little simpler, but the platforms in the toy box are all made up of different toys you might expect to find in the children's waiting room of a dentist office. Occasionally, the game will release itself from this expectation and go kind of wild with its level designs and presentation, some examples being the jellyfish area of the tree, the entirety of the space level, and the kaleidoscope section. The music level does some interesting things with its sections, like crawling through a literal jukebox and destroying the circuit board that controls it, or being chased by a huge microphone down a truss full of color-coded cables. The only unrealistic thing about that is that it is way too organized.
The game regularly wants to remind you that these levels take place somewhere in the house, and so you get some excellent moments like how visible the outside of the snow globe becomes as you ride the gondolier up the mountain in the attraction level. There's also the part where you can try to throw paper airplanes into Rose's window at the beginning of the tree level. The Castle Town also appears obviously to be in Rose's room as well. These are impressive details, a step above the basic framework of visual storytelling that the game needed to meet, and I applaud the effort. It Takes Two is a great game. There's no other way to say it really. It has plenty of extremely well done gameplay sections and puzzles, more than most games nowadays. The visual design is incredible. There are tons of areas that are lovingly realized, and just as many huge, impressive areas that you move through at such a breakneck pace that you can't even really see it.
The writing is overall good, funny at times, and meaningful in others. The story has plenty of good moments, a little misguided at times, and the pacing is a little rough, but mostly it holds up. It's just a well put together, entertaining, fun game, and I can't recommend it enough, to couples especially. As for you, watching this video, you probably shouldn't bother. It's not like you have anyone to play it with anyway. That felt really mean.
It's not that bad.
It's mean. Hi, you're gonna die alone.
They'll be fine. They're big boys.
Or girls. Hello.
No, I have my analytics.
The next level has a lot of little mechanics. Little tiny men. Mechanics. The next level has a lot of little mechanics dedicated to it. Dang it. Why did I do that?
Why did you do that?
You gonna be all right? It's not that
funny.
You need me to take this one?
I don't know. That feels stupid. I'm sorry. It's still recording.
The next level has a lot of little mechanics dedicated to it.
I can't. I'm not ready.
Okay.